Hello, everyone, and today I'm going to finish off this seminar on angels and demons, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't seen any of the four previous ones, to go back and take a look at them, and most especially to go back and take a look at the last session, as it's been quite a while since I've recorded the last session. So by way of review, what I want to do is just spend a few minutes reviewing what we covered in sessions 1 through 4. We spoke about the nature of reality, and we examined that term in the scriptures. In the English, it's transferred as the deep, the abyss, and we looked at it within the context of a potential transdimensional understanding. And as we considered the issue of determining what reality is, you'll remember that we talked about the fact that we are, for the time being, confined to a three-dimensional construct, and thus it is our natural tendency to calibrate our understanding reality within the confines of a three-dimensional construct, or a three-dimensional universe, length, width, and height. And as a result, to truly grasp what the Holy Scriptures teach about the true nature of reality, it requires that we receive revelation from a source that is outside or above our dimensional reality. And so we must receive revelation from a being that is above. And this revelation has been revealed to us in the writings of the Holy Scriptures. We spent some time looking at the perspective of reality as it's defined by Islam. We looked at it from the perspective of Judaism, but the balance of our time has been spent looking at it from the perspective of the biblical data, both the Old and the New Testament, about what they have to say as the only absolute, true, and infallible guide as to what the true nature of reality really consists of. We investigated some in the past two sessions, looking at the concept of transdimensional beings, that is, beings that have the ability to pass through three dimensions into what I postulated was a four-dimensional reality based upon a reading in the book of Colossians. We looked at cherubim, what they were. They are defined as living creatures. Nowhere in the Bible are cherubim equated with angels. They are a higher being, and Satan himself being one of these cherubs. And we looked at seraphim. We read about them and studied them in the book of Isaiah. And then archangels and the two chief princes that are primarily named in the Holy Scriptures, Michael and Gabriel. So I want to move on and conclude this study today by looking at the final two beings that I would like to cover in depth just a little bit, and that's angels and demons. But I want to spend just a few minutes to restate the purpose and nature of this study. The purpose of this study is not to get us so engrossed in the study of angels and demons or what reality is, but rather to bring us face to face with the reality, that reality is much more than we can comprehend, and that to truly understand what reality involves means that we are revelation dependent. And so as we examine this revelation, it's not enough to make the examination and then to draw some conclusions, but the final step in this is, how should this revelation calibrate our understanding of what is real? And in the light of that, how should we then live? How should this understanding of what reality involves as a result of what we perceive and what we receive from revelation, how should that change the way that we live and the way that we prioritize the things in our lives? So with that said, we're going to launch right into the subject of angels here. And you'll notice the slide here says good angels because the Bible does mention evil angels, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. But anyway, the Greek term is agaloi, which has the basic meaning of angels. So angels are good in the sense that they are dispatched by God to carry out his agenda in the temporal realm and to communicate with humanity. And so I would imagine something like this. When God created angels, when he created the good angels, he, at the first day in job orientation, he said, look, you are my messengers, and I will be sending you forth to carry out my agenda and to communicate my agenda to humanity. Okay, so let's move into the first passage I want to examine that teaches us something about the nature of angels. It's in Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 and 2. Here there is the encounter between Abraham and the three men, or the three angels that came to him. In verse 1 we read, Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, and as he was sitting in the tent of the door in the heat of the day, so he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent of the door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. Now, excuse me, what caught his attention was the fact that he looked up and saw 3 men traveling in the heat of the day, which would be the hottest part of the day. And so it would be very unusual to see people traveling during that time of day. Usually they would either travel early in the morning or later in the evening after the temperatures had mediated and cooled somewhat. Anyway, he saw them and he ran to them, and it says that he bowed himself to the ground, which was a typical greeting. Now, these 3 men appeared to Abraham by the terebinth, or oaks of Mamre, and these were most likely pagan shrines that were, or places where pagans would gather to offer worship to the pagan gods. And so they're spelled out as the oaks of Mamre for a specific reason, and I think that that's to demonstrate the fact that this was in fact a place where pagan worship took place, but it was now being taken over by those who had been sent from God to communicate a message to Abraham. So the text tells us that they appeared as men, but that they were not humans. 2 were angels, and the other was the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord, his appearance in the Old Testament always signifies a pre-incarnate appearance of the second person of the Trinity. So we know that they were angels, but they looked like men. In Genesis 18:8, we read that Abraham, in his desire to be hospitable, it says he took butter and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. So these angels had the ability to consume food, although I would imagine that eating is optional but not required of them. And so they look like men, and they ate food. Genesis 19:1 gives us some more information. Now we read later on that 2 of the 3, here they're identified clearly as angels. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Again, a customary way of greeting. Now, as the story moves on, with now these 2 angels being in the presence of Lot, in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 19 we read, But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So here again, these 2 angels who appeared to Abraham as men, and presumably appeared to Lot as men, also had to continue eating. In verse 19:11, we read something more about their nature. When the ungodly men of the city drew near to have perverse relations with these two angels. In verse 11, we read, "And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So as the men pressed upon the door and they backed Lot into the door, the angels reached out, pulled him back into the house." It doesn't say how. One would assume that they opened the door and pulled him back in. But it also said that they struck those who were pressing on the doorway with blindness. Now notice it says there that they were at the doorway, and yet as a result of being struck with this blindness, they couldn't find the door. So what the text is actually saying here is that what these angels visited upon these ungodly men was not just a visual blindness, but also a severe form of mental disorientation where they didn't even know where they were anymore. And then moving forward in the Old Testament, in Genesis chapter 28, verse 12, this is now speaking of Jacob. We read there, it says, "Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there were angels of God were ascending and descending upon it." So this tells us here that these angels were ascending and descending upon this ladder from heaven to earth, or they had the capacity for transdimensional travel. Verse 104, verse 4, which was a verse that we studied in our last session, but from a different perspective. We read, "Who makes his angels spirits, his ministers a flame of fire." So you'll remember in the last session, we looked at the second half of this verse, "his ministers a flame of fire," that seems to differentiate cherub and seraphim from angels or messengers, which are here called spirits. That is a non-corporeal sentient life force. Reading on in Psalm chapter 8, verse 5, we read more about the nature of angels. We read, "For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor." So we see here that they have a superior nature to humanity. They're higher in the created order. We read in Daniel chapter 10, starting at verse 15, "Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, 'Gabriel, make this man understand the vision.' So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, 'Understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end.' Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright." So obviously the sight was so awesome that it struck fear into Daniel, that he went through a subsequent adrenaline rush. Now, adrenaline is an important part of your body's ability to survive, but sometimes the body will release the hormone when it is under stress, but not facing real danger. This can create feelings of dizziness, lightheadedness, and vision changes, and I can testify to this from personal experiences. Some years back, I got into a motorcycle accident where I dropped my motorcycle. I was able to get up from under the motorcycle and with the help of my son get the motorcycle back upright. But at that moment, I experienced a rush of adrenaline. I became dizzy. My heart was beating fast, and I dropped to the ground and passed out. So I would imagine that something like this happened to Daniel as a result of all of this sudden, this awesome, fearsome being appearing in front of him. Learning more about this, we continue to read in the account of Daniel. "Now on the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, that is the Tigris, that I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, and his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words was like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore I was left alone when I saw this great vision, and no strength remained in me, for my vigor was turned to frailty within me, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the sound of his words, and while I heard the sound of his words, I was in a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. Suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palms of my hands. So this passage is interesting, is that it describes this angelic being with colors. And so we see there that he's wearing a golden belt, and that his body has the appearance or the coloration of beryl. Now, interestingly enough, the Hebrew word that is translated beryl here is actually the word Tarshish. Now, Tarshish is also a region in the Western Mediterranean. And as a matter of fact, the nickname for Tarshish was the land of the stone, because it was a place where this precious yellowish in color stone was mined. So it says that he had a body like beryl, his face was like lightning. Literally, his face looked like lightning in color. And if you stop and watch when lightning flashes across the sky, it has this silver color. So the face was like silver, and eyes like the torches of a fire, arms and feet like burnished bronze or polished bronze, and then the voice of a multitude, loud and possibly a wide spectrum of voice inflection, sort of like if you heard a choir of singers saying the same sentence over and over again, you would hear a wide spectrum of voice inflections. Okay. In Daniel chapter 10, verse 8, we read, "Therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me unto corruption, and I retained no strength." Now what I gave you here was I gave you the English translation of the Greek Septuagint, because it really correctly renders what happens here in this verse when Daniel saw the majesty and awesome of this angelic being. In comparison to himself, in comparison to that, he saw himself as a just corrupt, or nowhere near the anatomical or the nature perfection of this being that was before him. So I guess you could say it would be like comparing, an earthworm to something like a human being. So he came face to face with just how below his nature was his fallen, but also his anatomical human nature. Okay. In Revelation chapter 10, verse 1, we read, "I saw still another mighty angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land." So in the book of Revelation, we have this account of this angel that will be sent to earth in the last day, and he will be of gigantic proportions because he's able to stand with one leg on the land and one leg on the sea. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14, we read this about angels: "Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who will inherit salvation?" And so these messengers of God, these good angels, are sent to serve those whom God has appointed to ordain salvation. And so if you are in the household of faith, if you have turned your life over to Christ in faith and repentance, then that means that these angels are sent by God to minister and to serve you. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, we learn something else interesting about them. When we're told to not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. And so there are times where God will send an angel to test us, to test our obedience, and to see if we are walking in obedience to the commands of Scripture. Okay, now we move over to evil angels, and I think it's important to distinguish this because of something that we'll look at in a few minutes when we get to the subject of demons. So in Psalm 78, verse 49, as the psalmist is recounting the great deliverance that God and the great judgment that God visited upon Egypt for their enslavement of the Jews, we read this, that He, that's God, cast on them the fierceness of His anger, wrath, indignation, and trouble by sending able angels of destruction among them. Now the King James Version actually reads it this way: He cast upon them the fierceness of His anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble by sending evil angels among them. So the Hebrew there literally means evil messengers. So there are two schools of thought on this. The first school is said that no, these were not evil angels. They were good angels, but God sent them to deliver these evil destructions upon the nation of Egypt for their enslavement of the Israelites. And then the second school says that no, they were evil angels, and evil angels are used by God to visit destruction and judgment on planet Earth, and we see that in the book of Revelation. But anyway, this verse is a reference to the 10 plagues visited upon Egypt, and that potentially, in some way, evil angels were the mediators of the plagues and therefore God's judgment. And this is the comment out of the Geneva Study Bible on this subject. So these evil angels are so called either for the effect, that is, of punishing the wicked, or else because they were wicked spirits whom God permitted to vex men. And then we have this account in 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 19 to 22, where a battle is going to take shape between Elijah and the false prophets of Baal. And we read this in 1 Kings chapter 22. Then Micaiah said, Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on His throne, and all the host of heaven standing by His right hand and on His left. Now, the host of heaven is a clear reference to angelic beings, as well as, of course, the four living creatures and the seraphim. And the Lord said, Who will persuade Ahab to go up, that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? So one spoke in this manner, and another spoke in that manner. Then a spirit came from the Lord, a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. The Lord said to him, In what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. And the Lord said, You shall persuade him, and also prevail. Go out and do so. So here the spirit is the same terminology that's used to define angels. It's a wind, that some sort of incorporeal being that has sentience, but it's named as a lying spirit. And then we read in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, the words of Paul, where he says, And lest I should be exalted above measure, by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. And so literally, we are being told that an angel of Satan was sent to buffet the Apostle Paul. Now, before we move on to the subject of demons, I just want to point out this very curious similarity as I read through these texts. So I'm going to read once again the account in Daniel chapter 5, verse 6, where we read, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like torches of fire, his arms and feet like burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Now, as I was reading in Jeremiah, where God is promising judgment down upon the Israelites because of their idolatry, I read this in Daniel chapter 8. See if you can pick up the similarities here between these two passages. But they are altogether dull-hearted and foolish. A wooden idol is a worthless doctrine. Silver is beaten into plates. It is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the craftsman and the hands of the metalsmith. Blue and purple are their clothing. They are all the work of skillful men. Now, amplifying on this potential connection, we read in Colossians chapter 2, verse 18, where the apostle enjoins upon his readers and us, "Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and what? The worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshy mind." And then one of the primary reasons for the writing of Hebrews is to deal with this issue of who is higher, Christ or the angels. So we read this in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and following. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he has by his inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. And then finally, in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, we read, "And no wonder, for Satan himself wanted to make a distinction between evil angels or fallen angels and demons, because I believe that there is a difference there, but I'll leave that up to you in your further study to draw a conclusion on that." So, in any case, moving into the subject of demons now, a demon, the Greek New Testament term is daimonio, and that is the way it is the Greek underlying word in the New Testament. But there are two words in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, that are in several places used to speak to the beings that we know as demons. The first one is sawir, which literally means the he-goat, or the satyr. I think you'll remember that from popular mythology. It's a goat, a man goat, a hairy man goat, so on and so forth. But we see a usage of this term in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 7, where we read, "They shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons," and here the Hebrew word is seir, or the hairy he-goat, "after whom they have played the harlot. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations." And then the second term that's used is the term shadim, which actually means a malignant spirit that is insolent and causes devastations. And I've given you two references here to see how it's used. The first one is in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 17, where we read, "They sacrificed to demons," that is, to the shadim, "not to gods. To gods they did not know, to new gods, new arrivals that your fathers did not hear." And then the second one is Psalm 106:37, where we read, "They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the shadim," or the demons. Now, moving into the New Testament, what we learn about them from the New Testament is that they are independent beings who occupy a position somewhere between the human and divine. They're said to enter into persons and cause illness, especially of the mental variety. We have an instance of this in Luke chapter 8, verse 27. "And when he had stepped out of the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. Obviously, there was a great deal of mental illness here. It says that they live in deserted places. Now, these are two quotes out of the Old Testament that are rendered in the Jewish Bible translation because they bring the words out. And martens shall meet cats, and the satyr, remember, shall call his friend, but there the Lilith rests and has found for herself a resting place. So the Lilith is there thought to be sort of like the queen of the demons, so on and so forth. That is the way they interpret that in the Jewish Bible. In Isaiah chapter 13, verse 21, we read, and martens shall dwell there, and their houses shall be filled with ferrets, and ostriches shall dwell there, and the satyr shall dance there. So in both the Old and New Testaments, demons are said to inhabit deserted places. Their ruler is Beelzebub, which literally means Lord of the Flies. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 24, we read, now when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this fellow does not cast out demons except by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons. They promote false doctrine. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 says, now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, and they are objects of worship. In Revelation chapter 9, verse 20, we read, but the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the work of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. But that brings us to the central question here. What are they? Are they fallen angels, or are they some other class of beings? As I've studied this subject over the years, that I have found that there are basically three theories that have emerged as to what these beings are. Now, one thing that I've noticed on my own is that nowhere in the Holy Scriptures are demons in any way equated with fallen angels. They seem to be a different class. What are they? Well, the mainline view is in fact that they are fallen angels who joined Satan in his rebellion against God. So that is the predominant view in Christianity and has been that way for quite some time. But it's important to note that it wasn't until the 2nd and 3rd century in the Christian era where demonic spirits and fallen angels were equated as being of the same nature. Another theory that gained a lot of popularity in the 1800s stated that they were the disembodied spirits of a pre-Adamic race of humans who populated the earth but were wiped out by God. And so this teaching teaches that prior to Genesis 1:1, there had been a race of humans that populated the earth, but they rebelled against God, and so God destroyed them, but allowed their spirits to remain on the earth as he recreated the earth, which its recreation picks up in Genesis 1:1, and therefore it is these disembodied spirits that became the demonic spirit, the creatures that we know as demons today. It was very popular and was popularized by a man named Pemberton. You can still find his book online. And then finally, they are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, who were hybrid human angelic beings. And so this is the theory that says that when angelic beings, the fallen angels, mated with human women, which we have recorded in Genesis chapter 6, that you had the demigods, as they're known in Greek mythology, or the superhumans. They were superhuman in strength, and they were superhuman in intelligence and in skill. But they were of both a human and angelic nature. And so when God killed them in the flood, their disembodied spirits, which are part angelic, were confined to the earth, and that these make up the creatures that we know as demons today. I'm not sure which one is correct, but if I would have to choose, I would probably choose the third one. Now you'll see these links in the slides, and I'll post these links in the comments section of this video, so that all these three articles come from a different perspective. The Jewish Encyclopedia, so there's quite a bit of information there. So I want to encourage you to read it, study it, and form your own opinion. Okay, so the reality is, as we draw this series to a close, these are the takeaways that we should have in all of this. That reality is much bigger than our ability to perceive. But God has been gracious to us, and He has revealed to us, He has given us a source that comes straight from Him, from above, that allows us to see and to perceive what reality actually consists of. What a great gift of grace God has given us. But knowing this, what do we need to keep in mind? Well, I think it's important that we heed the words of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, where we read, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." Do you see that? Do you see how the scriptures here recognizes the reality of these evil angelic beings, this evil demonic host that's under the control of Satan, and that we don't see them, but we are engaged day by day, moment by moment, in a struggle with these beings. This is ultimately who our war is against. But how do we fight an enemy that we can't see? How do we fight an enemy that we can't smell? Well, the methodology is given to us in the verses that follow. "Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day." The day when the devil and his adversaries press down upon you and seek to discourage and seek to destroy you and seek to get you to compromise your faith. "So that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." How do we stand? This is how we stand. "Having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace, above all else taking the shield of faith, by which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the work of God." And so there it is. That is how we are to engage this battle and to be victorious day by day, moment in this battle, is by heeding the counsel of God and living in truth and taking upon ourselves the breastplate of the righteousness of Christ, being prepared with the gospel and all that it says, and living by faith. It is faith that ultimately gives us the victory in all of these areas. And we have the helmet of salvation, which assures us that we can never receive a fatal blow in this war, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. But you'll notice there that I underlined "in the Lord," because you see, that is the first prerequisite, is that you have to be in the Lord. And so how does that happen? If you're sitting there today and you don't know how it is that you can get in the Lord, so that you can even begin to perceive the reality of reality, let alone engage the battle that you will be called to. Well, that's given to us in these famous verses in John chapter 3, verses 14 to 16, where we read, "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up." And Jesus of Nazareth, declared to be the Messiah, declared to be the Christ, testified to in 4 different ways and by many different signs and wonders. He was crucified. He paid the price that we could never pay. And he paid the price to make a way for us to become part of the family of God. And so he was lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And so God has been gracious. He's been gracious to fallen humanity. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." And so have you done that today? Are you in the Lord? You can do that right where you're sitting, and I hope you will. Well, it is my prayer that this study has somehow been beneficial to you, at the very least that it might encourage you to do more studies in this area, and to always remember that this information should calibrate the way that we live our lives and the priorities that we set. With that said, I'm going to say God bless and have a nice day.